This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Good morning, truth seekers and true crime junkies. We are back for another week of Hit the Road, Jack, Finding the Zodiac. Last week, we actually covered some of the employment of Jack Terrence, which was with U.S. Steel. We talked a little bit about how he was, or U.S. Steel in itself, revolved around some of the things that we'll be talking about in the presentation, including adverse reactions to presidents such as Harry Truman and John F. Kennedy. We talked about the involvement of Chicago with U.S. Steel and the building of the Chicago Picasso. Also, U.S. Steel sponsored the United States Steel Hour with the Disney Resort and actually set up a modular product for high-end and luxury customers to view their products. We also know that U.S. Steel manufacturing plant that was located on the Disney property also helped to build the now defunct Court of Flags in Orlando, Florida on Major Boulevard. And the real estate development that they were involved with was in Florida during the 1970s. So there's a lot of things that wrap around this particular case, including the Disney aspect that we'll be talking about. That really plays back into the media and their possible involvement in some of these things. But what caused me to backtrack to last week's presentation is that I had received an email from Terry Batcher, which was one of our previous guests, and he had indicated some of the addresses that I was listing for Jack were non-existent. So I, of course, had to step back into the research a little bit. And I basically took for granted that what was listed on Jack's paperwork was going to be true and correct, but I should have known better. So the mystery seems to be shrouded in even more mystery. So we're going to go back into 1950 with Jack, and we're going to hit the presentation, pick it up from there, and start talking about these addresses. So we also talked a little bit last week about the murders have ended in California. We don't see anything for a few years, and we climbed back into Jack's military records. So I do show that at some point in time between July 1950 and January 1951, previous to the entry into the Air Force Reserves, that Jack had to have appeared back in California. Obviously, he is listing an address of 6049 Park Avenue in Richmond, California. Now, when he re-enlists into the reserves, he's enlisted for 3 years. Of course, we have the Korean War that has just begun, and Jack is really wanting to be back in action, back in war. So we see him re-enlist again. We should, at the same time he's listing this Park Avenue address, it is showing on Ancestry.com that both Jack and Letha Terrence were listed at an address of 218 Cunningham Street in Highland, California during 1951. We're going to look at that address as well because it seems to be there's some inconsistencies or impossibilities for this address to have been a physical residence of Jack's. On March 2nd of 1951, Jack goes active in the Air Force and he's sent back to Japan during the Korean War as a supply sergeant. This is where he met his only true love, Iko. Jack claimed to have been married under Japanese law, albeit he's back home married in the United States to Letha with 4 kids. He was suddenly ripped away from Iko and he is sent home approximately a year later in 1952. And I did actually, through my research this last week, discover the reasoning for that. But per Dewhurst's book, Jack is sent to Japan as part of the occupational forces. He shacked up with a Japanese woman named Iko, who Jack referred to as only woman he had ever loved. This may be where Jack found his love of amphetamines, he insists, as it is widely used during the war to help the forces to stay awake, and it is an over-the-counter medicine at this point. So the story basically goes with Letha writes a hardship letter to President Eisenhower. This may be another one of those triggering points for Jack. As the Zodiac, we see that he uses the Eisenhower stamp many times on many communications, along with the Truman stamp. This again may lead back to U.S. Steel. Letha sends this letter to President Eisenhower, who gets Congressman Miller to seek a discharge for Jack so that he can take care of his family. I believe that Jack, or many people believe that Jack was very upset by this. And we did, like I said, see the use of these president's stamps on his communications. Now, if amphetamines were available over the counter until it became a controlled substance in 1968, and at this point it is stated that Jack began to cook his own. He could drive long distances without any rest and stay up, all night during his adult life. This would account for the travel necessary to commit some of these crimes and to be gone and out the next day, completely out of the state or out of the area. So basically, looking at these addresses, like I said, Terry Batcher had brought to my attention that the Riverside address of 218 Cunningham does not exist, nor does a house at the 6049 Park Avenue Richmond address. So I began researching all the listed addresses by Jack as well, and this is what I found. I cannot locate an address of 218 Cunningham Street, Riverside, California, but we will talk about its existence. Well, I'm going to take us back one more step back to his previous records. Which was his discharge in 1950, February of 1950. He listed a permanent mailing address of 102 East 17th Street, Austin, Texas. I had alluded to the fact that I did not know if this was his mother's address, where his mother might be at this point in time. We know that Jack is constantly returning to her, and throughout the years, he had maintained her address as a mailing address in Texas. So when I looked up the 102 East 17th Street, it looks as though there is no longer a building. And you can see that circled over here next to Congress Avenue. So basically, Congress Avenue runs down the left side and 17th Street runs right between these buildings right here. And we can see here, there appears to be, when I zoom in with the bird's eye view, there used to be some type of a building here. However, I showed that this was a downtown district all the way back into the early 1900s. So I highly doubt that there was any residences in this place, but we can see what does surround this particular address is the Barbara Jordan State Office building listed here. So that's the most immediate and closest building to what used to be 102 East 17th Street. And then adjacent to that, we have the Lyndon B. Johnson building. So this address that was listed appears to be the tax building, or the Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts. So that kind of raised my eyebrow a little bit, because there is the cipher solve from Harriet Suchet that indicated that there was a possibility that he was some type of an IRS or Treasury goon. So he would have been involved with the IRS, the Treasury, maybe even the Comptroller's office in Texas. Either way, we find that 102 East 17th Street is not a physical residence, but he does show it as a permanent mailing address. Very interesting. When we get to the 6049 Park Avenue, which was listed on his reserve card, we can clearly see here that there appears to be no type of house, no type of a driveway that could even move into this property, albeit it shows it's on the back side, listed as 6049. We can see that Wildcat Creek Trail runs through the backside to Cat Canyon Parkway, and nowhere in here can we see any entrance or any facility or a building. Now, of course, this is today's current look. However, though, I see that we do have some really mature trees. They've probably been here for decades. So I wonder if there was actually ever really any type of a property on here or home on this property. There's also the possibility, because Jack was a traveler, that and he would live in caves, he would live in buses, he would live in all kinds of alternate type housing, that he was merely just squatting on this particular property. So Nothing to indicate that there was actually a property here, and there was no information suggesting otherwise. I went a little step further in this and found that the opposite side of Wildcat Creek Trail is what is referred to as Alvarado Park in the Bay Area. This particular section, 6049 Park Avenue, per the title company, shows that it was purchased by East Bay Regional Park District in 1992. So no records on anything previous to 1992. I find that most of the databases kind of start to pick up around 1985 with the onset of the internet and computers and being able to catalog and database most of these locations. So nothing before 1992 on this property. When I went into the 218 Cunningham, it does not exist either. So we can see up here at the top where Cunningham Street is, it actually is this street that runs along this line, this long line here, and it crosses at 5th, but it actually dead ends into 5th based on today's map. So we don't see that that runs into 3rd Street. There is a creek that runs through it here, and that might possibly be why the street does not continue over and through. And it actually enters right down into Norton Air Force Base. If Cunningham Street at any point in time had continued through, it would have continued through at this point and hopped over that river and on into what is now Norton Air Force Base. I did look up Norton Air Force Base, and it has been around since the early 1900s as well, before becoming the San Bernardino International Airport. So if there is a second or a Cunningham or 2nd Street in here, it would have fallen on this fault line where I have crossed. So as I looked at the map, 2nd Street off to the left-hand side, previous to the San Bernardino International Airport, there is a 2nd Street over to the left. And I drew a line straight through to see approximately where Cunningham would hit 2nd if it had, and lo and behold, it hits right in the middle of the Norton Air Force Base, which doesn't shock me. It seems like most of these crimes, if not all of these crimes, revolve around some type of a military base or a VA hospital, which would be an easy slip into and out of the public eye, because obviously most people would not consider looking in these areas for an individual, simply commit the crime in inner city and then hop back onto the base and you're pretty much clear. So I wasn't shocked to see that this fell directly into an Air Force base, but it does bring us back to the fact that 218 Cunningham does not exist. So either Ancestry.com's information is incorrect, or there was a reconfiguration at some point in time, in which case Cunningham no longer ran into this area, into the Air Force Base. So at this point in time in 1952, Jack's brother Charles's wife, first wife Dolores, indicated that she met Charles and Jack together in Michigan in 1952. So we now have a witness, or a family witness, that indicates that Jack is still traveling back and forth between the Western states and the Eastern states, and back in Michigan once again. So he is consistently making these trips back and forth. She states that Jack would show up and he and Charles would say they were leaving for a pack of cigarettes, and they would be gone for days, weeks, and months. And we're going to hear a little bit more about her take on this here shortly. We did talk a little bit about Operation Sea Spray, which occurred in San Francisco, and the effects of that. We will talk to Harriet Suchet pretty soon in regards to her take in the 1990s and what was going on with chemical or biowarfare. And her father, who was a merchant marine, she believed that he and a co-worker of hers at McDonald's, although she believed she would have been the target, she should have been opening the mail at McDonald's during that particular time frame, because she managed or was a manager of the establishment, and instead a co-worker, because she was not there, opened the mail and became ill and died. And all she could really tell us at that point is that hazmat was involved. Nobody was allowed to see her coworker. Her coworker had passed, and then subsequently her father received a package as well. And that package, when he opened it, he then became ill with what she believed was anthrax as well. And I'll let her tell that story when we get there. But there is some tie in there with the letters to John Walsh and the victims of the New Jersey, or the letter that has been redacted in the FOIA files that was sent to McDonald's in Chattanooga, Tennessee. This may be a tie-in to the McDonald's letters that was sent out here in San Francisco. So I'd love to see what the letter said to Chattanooga, Tennessee, but I have not seen that letter in person. I have reference to it in the FBI files, but there's no mention of what it even said, just who it was mailed to. So climbing back into Jack's military record, we're now into 1953. In January 7th of 1953, he receives his honorable discharge that is filed in Travis County. He has obviously been returned home from active duty, and he is back, or at least his records are back in Texas. It's getting really complicated at this point to tell where Jack really is, because his paperwork is not lining up with what we're being told by personal family members or other information, like finding out that his residences were not good. So after he receives his honorable discharge, we see that from January of 53 to May of 53, and then July of 53 to December of 53, Jack is attending an auto mechanic training at Travis County Vocational School in Austin, Texas. He does have knowledge of car mechanics, which brings us to the Sherry Jo Bates murder, in which case the suspect had manipulated the vehicle so that it did not work, and then approached to assist Sherry Jo Bates, and then walked off with her and subsequently killed her. So we now see that he does have actual education or training in auto mechanics, and it indicates that he was working as a mechanic while going to school from January to December of 1953. This is where we step into the very next program. We talked about Bluebird and Artichoke, and the transition from one program into the next. As one got shot down or shut down, they would simply just reopen it under another name and begin that continue the process that they were doing. Well, that then translated into MKUltra. It began December 1st of 1953. The MKUltra program began in actually the 1950s, like we said, with the other two programs, but has been officially sanctioned and has begun in Manila, Philippines, and Atsugi, Japan, at the U.S. Air Force bases. The CIA director, Alan Welsh Dulles, and Dr. Sidney Gottlieb and Richard Helms headed the MKUltra program. This had the use of LSD, other drugs, torture, and hypnosis to cause memory loss in individuals, or to get them to talk as an experiment for spies. LSD is spoken about by the Zodiac in the 2002 and 2003 letters sent to Tom Voigt, which we will get to, who has completed and Tom Voigt has completed many documentaries on the Zodiac, though I don't know that he actually brings those letters up. I did find some other pictures in Jack's belongings. These appear to be circa 1954 and may very well have to do with Jack and going to pick up Charles and his family in Michigan. We know that previous to March of 1954, somewhere between December of 53 and March of 54, Jack shows up in Michigan again, and Charles and Jack move Charles's wife to Arkansas. So Dolores is taken with the baby and dropped there. She says for 6 months. So Charles and Jack actually indicated they were going back to Texas. However, the path that we're going to show through the paperwork is going to show that he's someplace else. It would make sense that these pictures coincide with that trip, since it is wintertime and it is likely that there would be snow in the regions in which Jack was traveling to pick up Charles, which would have been the Michigan area at that time. So this is, again, just an assumption, but these appear to be the correct time frame. One of the things that I found interesting in Jack's belongings was a picture of a billboard that introduced a nuclear power plant. And that's not shocking, since we know that Jack is going to shortly become a member of General Electric's nuclear power plant in San Jose. So he did have a fascination with these things, and I believe that he was interested in them well before he actually began working on them. This particular power plant shows that it's 5 miles north of Charlevoix, Michigan, on US 31, I believe it says, which not coincidentally, is a place where John Ramsey has a second home. So in Charlevoix, Michigan is the second home of John Ramsey. And we've talked a little bit about Ramsey and how it fits into this presentation, but we'll get deeper into that as we go. In this particular location, when I mapped it out, is pretty much a halfway point between Great Lakes, Michigan, and Chicago, Illinois. We found a few more pictures, and it looks like an airplane wing. So Jack is definitely getting around by plane at this point, possibly not necessarily always driving, and having access to maybe military hops and flights of such. So all these pictures come from the same cardstock as the ones we just looked at, and would be consistent with being taken in the same general time frame. Knowing that Jack is a photographer, we see him relatively quickly move through the different periods and phases of photography, in which case he appears to be on the upper hand of the newest technology that's out there for pictures, and we see this run throughout his life. I also found, Jack left inside of his metal box a keychain with 2 keys on it that were addressed, if it got lost, to a post office box in Michigan for GMAC. So here's another tie back to Michigan. It does list a PO box. So Jack is showing the proximity and knowledge of the areas I assert that he's a good suspect for. These appear to be either a lockbox or locker type keys. Zodiac claims to have left items all over California in lockboxes, and maybe or in storage sheds, and maybe the East has their own storages they don't know about. The letter written to Bill Hirons explicitly identified a locker at a train station, so these keys could fit there as well, as to where he was hiding his loot, which train stations coincide with most of the earlier crimes in some way. And I do believe we're still going to hear some things about train stations or rail yards, which I think are probably more like dump sites at that point. But so these keys found in Jack's belongings, and the return to owner address goes to Southfield, Michigan. We will see Southfield, Michigan again in the Oakland County child murders. It becomes part of that era and the center of the Oakland County child killers activities in 1976. So it does list the GMAC PO Box 2036, Southfield, Michigan 48038-2036, with an ID number of 2112804, and the Hudson number, or the Hudson key number, C as in cat 272, A as in apple, and the second key was a herd lock key number HC044. So just another piece found in that green box. I look at it as kind of the mementos, or maybe even the reminders of these areas. So I am not exactly sure which era this comes out of. This could have been from the 50s. This could have been from the 70s. I'm not exactly sure. However, it definitely ties him back to GMAC, which we know in the Oakland County child murders, there is one of the number one suspects is a Chris Bush, who is the son of a high official in the General Motors Corporation. So there is definitely some tiebacks there to those particular crimes. And it looks like in March of 18th of 1954, Jack returns to the Navy and a 6-month training course at Treasure Island. But I'm not sure what that training course is. I have not found any information in regards to it. I wondered if this was the same 6 months that Charles's wife was left in Arkansas with the child, because Jack requests for a hardship discharge in 1955, and he indicates he was in Arkansas previous to reenlisting, though we know that he wasn't in Arkansas based on other track records. So it seems as though every time Jack places an address in one of his communications, he is not necessarily telling the truth about where he is. So I just wrote that I thought it was another bogus address for Arkansas, because it doesn't literally say, but just says that he was in Little Rock before leaving. So Jack shows his skills at typing, so we're going to see some of that. And we we know that typewritten letters were used in the Bauerdorf case, Sherry Jo Bates, the Albany, New York murders, the Oakland County child murders, with the Dear draft board letters that we're going to find in these communications. So after reading Stephen Dewhurst's book, it's become apparent there's a chance that Jack and his brother had a run-in with the San Francisco Police Department. Dennis thought this might have precipitated or at least contributed to Jack's long-term antipathy towards the SFPD. I know that he writes to the SFPD as one of the 3 communications that he sends. The others are 2 actual media outlets and newspapers. So whether he was actually taunting the SFPD on purpose because of his run-in, we'll never know. Or if it was just similar to most of his actions, which was to write both to the media and to the police. So Jack and his brother, it's said that Jack and his brother Don were out on the town in San Francisco, possibly in the North Beach section, which was becoming a widely known body strip where military men would go to see some pretty girls wearing very little and blow off some steam. It is the same neighborhood through which Clint Eastwood would later chase the mythical murdering terrorist Scorpio. And that brings us to John Walsh's letters, Scorpion letters, which I believe that obviously Jack is heavily following the media. He's following any type of shows that are made in regards to these crimes. And sometimes he's picking up, I think, evidence from those and using them in the future. So we see the Scorpion letters to John Walsh in the future of 1991. But this particular movie with Clint Eastwood was Dirty Harry, that was made in 1971. So in 1991, a 20-year anniversary of the movie, we see these letters going to John Walsh indicating that they are from Scorpion. So Jack and Don had some sort of run-in with a number of SFPD cops one night who administered some street justice with nightsticks in their feet. Jack and Don were not arrested, but they were left bleeding in the gutter. Over the rest of his life, he would be in many fights, but he did not like to lose them. So later, he spoke bitterly to both Charles and Dennis about the San Francisco Police Department on many occasions. During this time, Jack started flying with a friend. Now, I'm not sure if this is in context because or time frame. I tend to believe that this was occurring at a much later date. However, Dewhurst did put it into his book that Jack had started flying with a friend who was collecting hours for his flying license. Jack was supposed to be the co-pilot and he would navigate the plane. Jack would talk frequently with the family about flying and navigating planes. I was under the impression that this was something that happened more along the lines around the Zodiac era. He did indicate he was familiar or that he knew and had befriended Arthur Lee Allen, which was one of the #1 suspects in the Zodiac Killer cases. And Arthur Lee Allen was known to have flown a plane. So this is where I had thought he had began learning to fly. And maybe this information is out of context and we'll have to bring it back up at a later point, but it was in the same time frame in Dewhurst's book. So he says that Jack was flying, and navigation included a graphic that was circular in shape and had the directions around a point which is typically divided into 360 degrees. One of the nuances of the compass rose is that the degrees represent a relative relation to magnetic north, and this is something that we know that the Zodiac referred to in his Mount Diablo cipher and letter, which indicates that he was familiar himself with this compass rose or the sextant that was based off of magnetic north. I do have, or I have placed, I found this murder to be interesting. It is an unsolved murder, again, of a high-profile couple. I did some research on this last week. I wasn't able to find out a lot about what Mr. Sam Shepard was involved with, but he was a neurosurgeon and a doctor who received his training out in Los Angeles during 1945 and 1946. So I'm not sitting well with this as actually Jack's responsibility, but because it was an unsolved murder and it had some key interesting facts that made me pay attention to it, I wanted to put this into the presentation, discuss it, and then possibly discuss why we could rule Jack out of it as well. So it's here. I haven't removed it. It is the murder of Marilyn Reese Shepard on Sunday, July 4th of 1954. So first, the July 4th thing brings to mind the Blue Rock Springs murders of the Zodiac Killer. So this could possibly have been a anniversary murder or something set to tie back. Again, not exactly sure, but it occurred in Bay Village, Ohio. And I'm going to show you the relation of that and where Jack and Charles and Dolores were at that particular point in time. But it is a 15-year anniversary by the Zodiac Killer if this was committed by the same person. So husband, Dr. Sam Shepard, completed his residency in neurosurgery at Los Angeles County General Hospital before returning to Ohio. He was arrested and imprisoned for 10 years and acquitted of murder in 1966. His counsel, after his first counsel died, the next counsel who picked it up was F. Lee Bailey. This I found really interesting because it seems like I keep hearing these names come up in regards to these cases that are in this presentation. And the reason for that is that F. Lee Bailey is Melvin Belli's partner, and Melvin Belli was written to by the Zodiac Killer. So to take that one step further, Melvin Belli has actually just represented Jack Ruby in regards to the murdering of Oswald. And F. Lee Bailey has not only been involved in this case, he's been involved in other high-profile cases like the O.J. Simpson case. But most notably is that in 2009, 30 days after I had released my opinion to CBS 13 News in regards to Jack Terrence's handwriting matching the Zodiac, we saw that Deborah Perez came out on the porch of the Chronicle with her publicist, who, lo and behold, is F. Lee Bailey, the disbarred attorney. So how these individuals keep revolving themselves around these particular cases is unknown to me, or they're literally just placed in these positions by the powers at will. So Sam Shepard claimed that that his wife was killed by a bushy-haired man who knocked him out twice. The bushy hair, we obviously see Jack with this curly, coarse, rough, bushy hair when it's actually grown out. And his brother also had curly, bushy hair. And we know that the two of them were together during this particular point in time. So Marilyn actually married Sam Shepard on February 21st of 1945 in Hollywood, California. This could have been where they came into contact with Jack. Wondering why a suspect would kill Sam's pregnant wife, but only knock Sam out twice is kind of a question. Leaving the male alive seems to be some significance for even the Zodiac. In a couple of the attempts to murder, he was successful with the women, and it was underkill with the males. So they were able to survive and then report in regards to Jack. On February 16th of 1963, we go on to find that Thomas S. Reese, Marilyn's father, actually committed suicide in Cleveland, Ohio, in a motel with a shotgun. And then on January 7th of 1955, Sam's mother, Ethel Niles Shepard, commits suicide with a gun. And on January 18th of 1955, his father, Richard Allen Shepard, dies of a gastric ulcer and worsened stomach cancer. I wanted to research the entire family, but I wasn't really coming up with a lot of information. They really didn't allude to what Sam Shepard might have been involved with during his time before his wife was killed. Again, I just find it extremely interesting that that he was knocked out not once but twice by this perpetrator after attempting to stop him. And so why didn't he deliver the kill blow? Why didn't he murder Sam Shepard is really the bigger question. So it appears as though that this was another one of those attempts to derail something that an individual was doing that someone else didn't like, because why else leave him alive is really my contention. There was a movie made in regards to this called The Fugitive. So we're back to the media. We have another unsolved crime and a movie that's made on it. And the media is making big money. The newspapers are making big money. Everybody seems to be making big money. And Sam Shepard is the one who pays for this. The media monopolized on this story, and as with most of these crimes, they've monopolized on newspapers, magazines, books, and movies. The plot was that the good doctor was going to out a pharmaceutical company for something they were doing wrong. I don't know if that was just the fictitious part of the movie of The Fugitive. Again, I couldn't find anything leading up to the murder in regards to the family. Maybe reaching out to his son who attempted to clear his name would be a good idea. So I'm not sure if this could be fiction or truth. If it is truth that there was some type of contention between Sam Shepard and pharmaceutical companies, this may also play back into the projects or the programs that were actively being participated in by the medical community, which Sam Shepard was a part of. So Sam's pajamas was actually found with blood on them and a DNA that did not match him or Marilyn, concluding that there was an intruder as he claimed. So Sam Shepard spent 10 years in prison for someone else's crime, and later DNA was able to exculpate him from the actual crime itself based on the fact that the DNA did not match him or his wife. Now, the research yields the third DNA sample to be from a blood type O. So if this is true, then that means that Jack can be ruled out of this particular case, because I show on his military records that he is blood type A, which is also the blood type of Sam Shepard, which is why he was excluded from the possible contributor to this third DNA sample. Jack and the number one suspect in the case, like I said, both have blood type A, but Jack is ruled out if the DNA evidence is correct. And again, we're just going to have to dig deeper into that to find out whether or not that's true. Here's kind of a layout of the map and what's going on. This may be why this murder, if Jack committed it, would be probably the reason why he's climbing back into the military really quickly, and he's getting out of Dodge, out of town, or making it look like he's not even nowhere near that area. After all, who would know that he had traveled to Michigan to pick up Charles's wife, and Charles for that point? So we can see up here at the top, we can see that Michigan is up here in the red circle. Ohio is right here on the main thoroughfare, which is where the Marilyn Shepard murder occurred, and then carried right on down into Little Rock, Arkansas, which is basically where they dropped Dolores off for 6 months, and where Jack claims to have worked previous to entering the military for this last stint. So the Zodiac Killer cipher solved by Lawrence Swearingham claims Dow Chemicals as a possible responsibility in MKULTRA. And the fugitive story, like I said, goes that the doctor was going to tell on a pharmaceutical company who retaliated by trying to make it appear as though he killed his wife to discredit and or character assassinate him. So this had to be politically or monetarily motivated by someone with a lot of money. It'd be interesting to know who the pharmaceutical company was. Sandoz, Dow Chemicals, maybe. We know that Sandoz was involved with the LSD in the MKUltra project, and possibly Dow Chemicals, again, needing to go back and do a little more research to see who provided the prescriptions or the drugs for these particular programs, if that storyline is true anyways. So either way, someone went to a lot of trouble to kill the wife while passing up Sam Shepard, who was sleeping downstairs. So the killer passes by Sam Shepard, goes upstairs, commits the murder. Sam Shepard, hearing his wife struggle, goes upstairs and finds the suspect as he's trying to escape, who then knocks him out. Sam Shepard is knocked out briefly. He comes to and realizes that the suspect is leaving the house, so he follows and chases him, I believe, out to a beach, where he is then again knocked out. He is taken to the hospital for his injuries, and that is where he tells the story. But not once, again, like I said, does the suspect deliver a blow that is going to kill him. So clearly there is something in this man's agenda that prevents him from actually killing Sam Shepard, when he easily could have done so with him being knocked out twice. He was an easy victim at that point. So why he doesn't kill him is a great mystery. We have some more pictures. Now these ones appear at a different time frame, though they are the same card stock, so they might have been relatively close in proximity to the time frame of the ones that were snowbound. And I look at some of these pictures, which I found myself to be a little sick to my stomach over, like the one in the bottom right-hand corner here has this emaciated horse who is pretty much skin and bones. You can see literally every single rib inside, and his hip bones. Rather disheartening, should I say. I'm not clear if this is the trip to pick Dolores back up from Arkansas, or where these pictures were actually taken. But these pictures appear to be late fall or early spring based on the bare trees. I would think that if this was early spring, we would likely see more green grass or something from the recent rains that would indicate that we were at a different time frame. So I'm really feeling like this is more the end of summer, fall, based on the lack of greenery, and may coincide with that 6-month time frame, in which case Dolores was left in Arkansas. So in April of 1954 to October of 1954 was that 6-month course that Jack was purportedly taking. It shows in his military records right here that he failed due to a lack of interest or application, and he preferred sea duty or another type of job. This literally gets Jack transferred, I believe, to Oakland for firefighting school at this point in time. So he is done in September 28th of 54 with the particular school, and then moves on to a 192-hour course, which was approximately 24 days. If they did 8 hours a day, it was approximately 24 days of training, and that would literally fit inside of the time frame between October to December 2nd of 1954. We see that on November 5th, he actually receives his structural firefighting school certificate for the completion of that course. And then we see on December 2nd of 1954 that Jack is actually then shipped off to the Naval Air Station in Atsugi, Japan. And we just finished talking about how MKUltra has been commissioned in Japan, in actually Atsugi, Japan, of all places, and in Manila, Philippines. So the Zodiac Killer claimed he would kill victims using fire. And we can see now that Jack has learned how to fight a structural fire, which probably means he's also learned how to set them correctly as well. So on the onset of MKUltra, it is in full operation at this point in December 2nd of 1954 when Jack arrives in Atsugi, Japan. Jack is required to assist in work at a radio station. This is where he finds his love for the ham radio operation as part of his duties and service at the Naval Air Base. Aside from his duties as Sergeant of Technical Supply, this must be where he gets his interest, and which means he would know how to decode or code and decode codes, and he knew how to landmark his position using a radio tuned into AM stations to pinpoint direction, as mentioned by Dennis. The Zodiac references the Mikado in several of his communications, which is a film that is shown in Japan and was played for the troops during this time while Jack was stationed there. So he has a relation to the Mikado. This is quite possibly where the government recognizes Jack's value for the MKUltra and ultimately the Operation Midnight Climax projects, if they hadn't already figured out who Jack was at that point. So MKUltra is the knockoff of Bluebird and Artichoke. The use of drugs, hypnosis, and torture to get information from individuals. The program used military personnel, students at universities, prostitutes, and socialites for trials in different venues. So this may have included the likes of Elizabeth Short and Marilyn Monroe, considering their behaviors with men. So let's list some of Jack's qualifications for the crimes that he could have committed. When I first began this particular this examination, I was told by my mentor that it couldn't Jack. He doesn't have enough experience or knowledge in order to perpetrate the particular crimes. He alluded to being a security guard wasn't sufficient enough for Jack to be smart enough to have committed these crimes. And so I thought that it'd be probative to go back and list some of these things that we see Jack has learned up to this point. Obviously, being a bootlegger, he has learned to run from the law early on. He's an expert marksman aside from being a hunter, so we know that he is very astute with the use of guns, and he has moved to an expert marksman level while he is in the military. He is a mechanic, which is the ability to disable a vehicle, as we see in some cases, and as a member of ARSMAT, he would have learned to jump out of planes. In the Air Force, he has the knowledge of planes and the sextant with the access to the wing walker boots. In the structural firefighting, he has fire knowledge and access to military bases. So the murders all seem to be, like I said, revolving somewhere around some type of a military base or a VA hospital. And then, of course, the actual ham radio operation being a significant play into the coding and decoding of messages. This is actually the solve that we will be seeing later on. I'll show you the complete solve in the Zodiac ciphers to come, but this is why I literally climbed into, after finding out that Jack was in Atsugi, Japan when the MKUltra project started. It was very interesting to see this solve from Lauren Swearingham. that confirms the possibility of Zodiac Jack's activity in the MKUltra program with the proper names of the handlers in the San Francisco area. So there's no coincidence, because this message has been solved from a person who contacted me, and after giving him Jack's systems, who Jack was, what he was a part of, he came up with this message, which is actually one of 5 messages to this particular solve that runs in tandem with this program. And then he decided he didn't want me to publish because he wanted to write about it and didn't want me to acknowledge these finds. However, I can't undo what has been done, and he had given me permission to publish these particular solves when we were working on them together, and I have that in writing from him. However, he did come back at another point in time and tell me that he did not want me to put this information out there on my own, because he was attempting to write a book. So there was a monetary drive for him behind it, which has never been my case. In fact, in this entire presentation, I'm the one paying to put this out. Nobody is paying me to give this information. So the solve that he came up with says Ira et al. Or and White, which we figured to be George Hunter White. I've quit MKU, which he believed to be MKUltra. The FBI does show the use of anagrams, substitution ciphers, transposition ciphers, first and last words of a sentence, first, second, or third letter, and last letter of words. And the Scorpion bragged about cryptograms. So we will see many of the aspects used, including Latin origin, applied to a letter in order to decipher a hidden message. So the background on that is George White and Ira Feldman were the handlers. George White is listed in Jack's 1963 picture at General Electric, but I'm not sure that they're the same person. Would be interesting to find out if they were, but it looks like he would have lost a lot of weight at that time. George Hunter White got his start in the Office of Strategic Services, which was the forerunner for CIA. We talked about that a little bit in the beginning, and the possibility of Jack actually being inducted to that society in the end of World War II. And we know that George Hunter White was working for the Federal Bureau of Narcotics when he was asked to head the MKUltra in New York. He retired from the CIA in 1967 after the closure of MKUltra project, and he became a captain of the fire department in Berkeley, California. So again, George Hunter White is kind of revolving around the same areas that Jack is. By February 12th of 1955, Jack is in Japan writing to the Boilermakers Union and the Iron Shop Builders and Helpers of America Union for reacceptance in preparation to his return for the U.S. Again, on a hardship discharge, he is looking to return, as he says, to his family, to take care of his family. And we have another typewritten letter for a comparison to be made to the Sherry Jo Bates and the other typewritten letters in this particular series. We do note that even though he indicates that before he went to Japan, he was in Little Rock, Arkansas, working, we see that his address that he lists is actually in Alameda, California. So there's some confusion. How does he have this address if he is not currently at the time living in the United States, because he's in Japan? And he indicates that before he left, so he says, I am enclosing my union card, initiation receipts, and a letter I received from the Little Rock business representatives. I believe this will enable you to give me the information that I need. So again, tie back to Arkansas, but an address in Alameda County. I did actually look up. So in February or March of 1955, MKUltra becomes an Operation Midnight Climax. So we see another name change in San Francisco, California. Again, this is headed by George Hunter White, aka Morgan Hall at the time, and came into the CIA OSS from New York, where MKUltra started in the US. Assisted by Ira Ike Feldman, they had safe houses at 225 or I think it was 255 Chestnut Street on Telegraph Hill in San Francisco, which really isn't too far from Bohemian Grove headquarters and the Templars Freemason headquarters. All of this stuff is kind of neatly fit in the same location in San Francisco. So Jack lists his address now as 346A Singleton Avenue, Alameda, California. This address is literally 14 and a half miles from the safe houses that are used by the CIA in the MKUltra project. So this is either Letha's address or where Jack was returning home to, because he already knew ahead of time where he was coming back to. Either way, I did not show any listing of Letha at this particular address, nor Jack really for that matter. So again, we're not really sure if this was a legitimate address or just another distraction that Jack has thrown out there, because he definitely returns to the San Francisco area when MKULTRA picks up. So Jack is not back in town. Oh, that took a little longer than we figured. We have less than a minute here. But we do show that Jack's not back in town or in California for a little more than a month. And we have our first murder in California since 1949. So we are now going to be climbing back into Jack is back. Murders begin, and lo and behold, this particular murder is in Berkeley, California, and we're going to show the relation to that, because even though when Jack is writing to be released to come home, stating that his address is in Alameda, we see that his very first ham radio license to come in a short 5-month period, so by November, I believe, of 1955, Jack is listing his address as Berkeley, and that's where we see this next or first murder pick up and begin. So we're going to get to that next week. We've seen the 3 years go by. We've seen no murders. We've seen Jack be out of the area, very busy in training, doing different things, or not even in the location where the murders had been occurring. So as they come to a stop and Jack is gone, we see now that Jack has come back. So we'll pick that up on that murder next week. Everybody have a great weekend, and we'll see you next Friday. Oh,